Everyone give it up for Rob Jones one more time. One of the best worship leaders I've ever seen, but also moves a table better than anyone I've ever seen. Would you agree? He's great. North Fort Worth, how are we doing tonight? We feeling good? You ready to get this thing started? You're like, yes, the sermon's the worst part. Bring Rob back out. Totally get it. Totally get it. Hey, we've been in a 4-week conversation here at Compass called I Never Said That. And what we've talked about are these phrases that Christians, religious people, church people can often use. And even if you're a Christian, you can grow up and grow in your faith and believe that they're actually in the Bible. Like they are straight from the mouth of God. And so we've talked about a couple different ones. The first one we talked about was this idea that God will not give you more than you can handle, to which I say, see 2020. We also talked about this idea that money is evil, but we actually found out that it wasn't money that's the root of all evil, it's the love of money, right? Money is just paper, it's just an object. What it does to our hearts, how it transforms us, what it does to us is what can make it evil. And then last week, we had this conversation about this phrase, love the sinner, hate the sin, and how actually a better way to approach that conversation is to say, I should love the sinner and I should hate my own sin. I should begin to look deep within myself and my own problems. Now, today we're going to do one more of these phrases, and let me just give you a heads up. The moment I say this phrase, you're going to be like, I don't think I'm going to pay attention anymore because I think he's wrong. This pastor is wrong. This is actually in the Bible. You're going to be like, this dude is way out of it. He's lost it. And you're not going to be alone in thinking that. In fact, as I sort of started working on this talk, I asked myself if I even agreed or disagreed, if I thought this was actually in the Bible. I spent a ton of time just trying to figure it out. So are you ready for what this phrase is? You're not ready yet. Okay, so this phrase, believe it or not, is not a Christian idea at all, but it's a very American idea. See, part of the reason I think that we like this phrase so much and we use this phrase, I would guess that almost 100% of us have used this phrase at some point, if not multiple times, to multiple different people. It's a very American idea. Are you guys ready for it now? No, you're still not ready for it. Okay, so this phrase, they've actually done some significant research around this phrase alone. Can we throw those stats up on the screen real quick for me? Believe it or not, 53% of Christians strongly agree with this phrase, and 22% of Christians somewhat agree that the Bible explicitly teaches this phrase. Another poll that was conducted among teenagers just about this phrase found that 75% of American teenagers said they believe it is the central message of the Bible. Not hope, not joy, not peace, not love, not grace, not the coming of God to be with people and dying and resurrecting. 75% of American teenagers thought this was the central message of the Bible. Are you ready for it now? No, you guys still aren't ready. Okay, so there's a story from a long time ago. Think like ancient Greece. This man is riding along in his wagon. And as he's riding, the weather begins to get dark and stormy, and the rain is coming down. It's pressing down all over, and eventually the wagon gets stuck. It gets stuck because his wagon was filled with all this stuff that he was going to sell and make money and go back and provide for his family and take care of them, but it's stuck. So this man, as any of us have done when we've received a flat tire, stepped out of his car and said only nice things. The story goes that he began to curse the world around him, and then he finally says this phrase, if only Hercules would help me. And the story goes that Hercules shows up. And Hercules looks at the man and says, in my version, why are you complaining? Why are you just whining? He says to the man, have you even tried putting your shoulder to the back of this wagon to push it out? He then looks at the man and says, don't you know the gods help those who help themselves? The gods help those who help themselves. And you can guess the phrase that I'm talking about today is the phrase, God helps those who help themselves. Now, see, I can already see some of you moving and squirming a little bit. You're like, this phrase is in the Bible. I'm pretty sure, didn't even Jesus say this? Well, Jesus didn't say anything like this, but there are verses that at least make you think about it. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8, if you're a Bible nerd, you thought of this immediately. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Those are big shots. If you haven't worked hard and cared for the people close to you, you are actually worse than someone who is not even a Christian at all. And for the guy who wrote this to his friend Timothy, that was a big phrase. We have another verse from Proverbs that if you're a Bible nerd, you probably thought of as we were talking about it. Can you throw that up for me real quick? Proverbs 14. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. See, we hear a phrase like this, God helps those who help themselves. We read scriptures like that. We hear stories. In fact, no lie, when I was working on this talk, I was flying from Dallas-Fort Worth to Orange County, California on a plane. And airports and planes are fascinating to me because I think we lose all sense of manners when we get on planes. We do whatever we want. If you're like, no, I don't, you're probably one of those people. And I'm sitting in this seat. I have the tray down, I have my computer sitting on it, and I'm typing, I'm starting to think about stuff, and this person who's sitting in front of me leans their seat as far back as it can go. At this point, my computer's basically in my mouth, and I'm just typing like this. It's like on my chest. And as it happens, no lie, I think to myself, God, would you come get this man? Would you come, whose man's is this? Would you come do something with this guy? And I stopped and I went, I'm not going to do anything about this, though. I'm not going to say anything to him. But God, if a stewardess just magically showed up and was like, hey, sir, quit being rude, lift your seat up, I wouldn't be mad. We wrestle with this concept all the time. Does God help those who help themselves? You can think of a million examples and maybe even other stories from the Bible that you sort of start to wrestle with as you think about this. But the interesting thing to me about these phrases is that while these verses and these stories are certainly examples that we have to actually do something in life, it doesn't mean that the phrase itself is actually true. Or better yet, it doesn't mean that the way in which we use the phrase is actually good and fair and true. It really opens up a broader question. The question is, who does God actually help? So, if you have a Bible, turn with me to Luke chapter 18. If you have a Bible, it's going to be right towards the back quarter of it. If you don't have a Bible, we're going to put it up on the screens right behind me, and it'll be on the stream that you're watching online. Jesus is now talking to this group of people, and he's about to tell them what the writers of the scriptures call a parable. Now, a parable is simply a story, but it's a story with a lesson. And the reason that rabbis like Jesus would teach stories like this is that they wanted you, as the audience member, to identify with a character in it, to recognize why that character wasn't right, and then to identify another character and why they were living the way that you should live. This is why all rabbis told stories. They wanted you to be forced to make a choice, to make a decision about something. And you know the question that we're asking. So Luke, as he's writing this, he starts off with some context for us. Luke 18, verse 9, he says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Now, Luke is saying, I'm going to tell you who the audience was that Jesus was talking to. He says, it's righteous people. It's people who thought highly of themselves. In other words, in Jesus' time, these were the religious people. The church folks, the people who went to church every Sunday and did all the right thing. This is who he's talking to. So Jesus, when he tees off this story and says there's two characters, one is a Pharisee, the other is a tax collector, they would have felt a little torn. Pharisees at this time were the religious leaders of the community. They were sort of connected with the political powers as well. They were the ones who had religious authority over the lives of the Jewish people. Now, for the most part, they were considered holy, but we know because Jesus' interactions with them were never all that good that while they were considered holy, they weren't always really considered good people. So Jesus, he plays one character into this story, and then he introduces a second one, and he says, a Pharisee and a tax collector were headed up to the temple. Now, if you've been around church, you've heard someone say the tax collectors were hated people, but it really goes a little bit deeper than that. See, what happens is Rome comes in, this massive empire, and they take captive the cities where these Jews find themselves, and they implement a tax. And the way that it would start is the Roman soldiers would go around and collect this tax. But these Roman soldiers, they got tired. They went to their boss and they said, listen, why don't we make the Jews work for us? So what they did was they put pressure on the Jewish king at the time. His name was Herod. And so Herod now has to collect the taxes for the Romans against his own people. But Herod, he gets a little lazy, so he passes off the responsibility. He calls it leadership development, but he just makes someone else do it. He hands it off to them and says, hey, I want you to do this work. You go out and collect taxes. They then hand off the responsibility, and then we get to the level of the kind of people that we're talking about. These are people who have been on multiple levels of society, pressed down, forced to collect taxes from people, even their parents, their brothers, their sisters. And if the tax was 30%, they would take 60% because they had to make a living too. The tax collectors were hated by the Jewish people. They were vile people. And so you can see Jesus has certainly not read the audience well, and he has made them all rather angry because they know what he's trying to get them to do is to pick a character to identify with. And they're not going to identify with the tax collector. So they identify with the Pharisee. The story goes on, verse 11. It says, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even people like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I mean, you can see this story sort of playing out. These two men have made this climb up to the temple, which was the center of any sort of religious action for the people of God, and they end up there at the same time, and this Pharisee begins to say out loud, God, aren't I great? You ever been there? God, aren't I great? I'm so proud of how humble I am, how I fast all the time. God, I pray so much. Some of you are going to get that humble joke later on the car ride home. God, look at me. I'm so great. God, thank you that I am not like this tax collector. I mean, he's basically verbally assaulting the tax collector. The tax collector can hear every word that's coming out of his mouth. God, thank you that I'm not like him. Thank you that I'm not like someone who has an affair and everyone knows. Thank you that I'm not someone who's a murderer, who hates people. God, thank you that I don't steal from people. God, thank you for making me so great. And this tax collector stands there and he hears all of this. And I love this picture. It says he can't even look up, which is what shame does to you, right? You can't even look up. The places you failed, the places everyone knows you failed, you just continue to look down, and no one has ever wanted to help you before. And now he's standing there, and all he can do is beat his chest, which is exactly what they would do when they realized that they had failed. Not just failed God, but that they had failed the people they loved the most. He stands there and beats his chest, and he says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Which in the English simply means, God, I need help. And I imagine as the tax collector yells out, God, I need help, the Pharisee goes, well, of course you need help. I mean, look at you. You've wronged the people that are closest to you. Your marriage isn't great. Your family's not doing well. Your finances are obviously in shambles. Of course you need help. And now you've shown up to this temple, this holy place, to ask God to help you. And you haven't even brought a sacrifice. Because what you should have done, if you came and said, God, had mercy on me, you should have brought a sacrifice. And you can hear this Pharisee going, you haven't even done the simple things that can help you. The irony is, the temple wouldn't accept anything from a tax collector. Wouldn't take their money, wouldn't take their sacrifices, because they were so defiled that anything they came in contact with would have also been defiled. And can't you just hear the Pharisee yelling to the tax collector? If you did this, you'd be better off. If you did that, you'd be better off. Don't you know God helps those who what? Help themselves. It's this moment where Jesus tells this story, and his audience is supposed to see themselves as the Pharisee, but he wants them to see themselves as the tax collector. The person who is willing to stand before God and go, you know what, God? I need help, and I don't know if I can help myself. Let me ask you, I began to wonder about this phrase. Why is it that we often use it? You know, I wonder, and maybe this is just me, but I think we often use this phrase when thinking about other people, about those people. You know, the homeless people we drive by, the people that we know in our lives whose financial situations are messed up, the people who we know they need help, but we just don't offer it. I think what we end up saying to ourselves is what this phrase really means to us is, I'm willing to help those who would help themselves. God, I would stick my neck out for so-and-so, but you know, they can't get it together. I would give this person money, I would help them out, but I really need to see them take some initiative first. Like you're the initiative king in the world. You know, the difficulty with that premise is that the people who need the most help are typically not the ones who have it together. People who are in deep enough poverty often can't get out on their own. People with deeply ingrained mental health issues often can't solve them in isolation. People whose marriages are falling apart often can't fix them without someone coming alongside them and helping them. And it becomes so easy for us to go, man, I would do something if they just got it together a little bit. I would step in and help. And the problem is that when we say those things, all it shows is that we've forgotten our own stories. We've forgotten the places where someone has shown up and offered us wisdom when we felt like we were helpless. We've forgotten the moments when a pastor or a counselor stepped in and helped us find a better way forward. We forgot the moments when a parent or a sibling showed up in our lives when we least expected it. See, the greatest problem with a phrase like God helps those who help themselves, at least for us, is self-righteousness. Is this capability that we all have as people to start to look out into the world and go, you know, if I were them, I wouldn't be that poor. If I were them, I wouldn't have those issues. If I were in their shoes, I would have fixed that a long time ago. But the truth is, you have no idea. I think a much better phrase to say instead of God helps those who help themselves is to start saying God helps those who are humble enough to know that they need it. God helps those who are humble enough to know that they need it. And look at even how Jesus ends this story. Verse 14, he says, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, this man talking about the tax collector, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. In other words, you want to know who God helps? It's not the people who pretend to have it all figured out. It's not the people who pretend that if they do all the right things that God sees it and goes, man, they've got it. They're perfect. No, the one that God acknowledges and steps in to change and to help are the ones who acknowledge, in fact, that they don't have it all together. They are the ones who admit, I can't fix this on my own. God steps in to help the poor, the broken, the marginalized, the people who need the most help. See, See, the terrible problem with the idea of God helps those who help themselves is it actually puts you in the driver's seat of your problems. Think about your own problems for a second. I mean, let's be real, right? If you were in the driver's seat and things were working out with those problems, you wouldn't really need God in the first place. See, the terrible problem with the phrase is that it puts us in responsibility. If we do something, if we take action, then God will show up and he'll tag along with whatever journey we're set out on. But that's not what the scriptures give us. In fact, the scriptures give us a much different picture of what God's help looks like. And believe it or not, it all takes place at the cross. It's all about this picture of grace and mercy that while you have failures and brokenness within yourself that you cannot change or alter on your own, God steps into time, into space and time to alter those at the cross, to die and to resurrect so that you could have life and life abundantly, life right here and right now. And through the cross, he offers mercy for every human to ever walk the face of the earth. See, mercy, the way that I like to talk about mercy is that it's God's faithfulness to the most disappointing people. It's God's faithfulness to the most disappointing people. God's help is never determined by your actions. God's help is determined by the mercy that he has within himself. He offers freely mercy and grace to everyone who needs it. John Ortberg has this great quote, if you've ever wondered who it is that God helps. He says this, he said, God helps people who ask for help. God helps people who are needy. God helps people who are weak. God helps people who are scared. God helps people who are in way over their heads. In fact, God helps people who can't help themselves. I think about the words of Jesus when he says, what I desire is mercy, not sacrifice. God is not looking at all of your problems and going, solve them on your own. Because if you could, you would. See, some of you probably walked in here tonight having problems in your own life, and you've been trying to fix them over and over. They've been perpetual problems, and yet you just can't seem to take a step forward. Your work is never going to be the thing that solves it. Your effort is never going to be the things that fixes the problem. In fact, a guy by the name of Paul would later write this in a letter to a church in Rome. He says something so similar to this. Romans chapter 9, verse 14 through 16. He says this, what then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. And this is the most important part. It does not, therefore, depend on human desire or effort, but on God's mercy. See, God has given mercy upon mercy upon mercy into your life. And maybe you've never heard that before. Maybe you felt like being a Christian meant you just said yes to Jesus and then you dealt with life on your own. That truly God helps those who help themselves, but that's not the gospel. The gospel is that while you cannot do it on your own, he can do it for you. And because he has given you so much mercy, you now have the capacity to give mercy to other people. See, God doesn't help those who help themselves. After he helps you, you become God's help to those who cannot help themselves. So if you want to figure out something practical that you can begin to do in your life, 2 words, humble yourself. Humble yourself. I know you're like so profound. Remember your story. Remember the moments in your life where you needed help because you couldn't do it on your own. And whether it was God, whether it was another follower of Jesus, whether it was someone else who stepped into your life, you needed help. Acknowledge the moments. Be humble. Acknowledge the moments where you've passed over people and thought, you know what? I would help them if they helped themselves. Because you've been given mercy, which means that God has granted you so much mercy to now pass on to other people. Because you remember your own story. Let me talk, though, about the caveat on this idea. And now I'm about to backpedal against everything I've just said, so bear with me. You guys are going to be like, this guy's an idiot. I want to talk to the person who finds themselves at a phase of life where you're just waiting. You're just waiting, right? You have these hopes, you have these dreams, you want to find a spouse, you want your marriage to get better, you want your kids to live a great life, but they've gone off the rails. You want your finances to get back into a good place, but it doesn't seem like that's happening. And you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're wondering why nothing's changing, and you're waiting. See, while God's help does not just go to people who help themselves, the truth is that God's help and you doing something are not mutually exclusive. They don't exist on two separate ends of the same plane. In fact, I would say it this way: God's help in your life does not remove your responsibility. While God may help every single person who humbles themselves and asks for it, it doesn't mean that you don't get to step in and partner with him. And that's the key word. It's not about the work that you do. It's about the way in which you partner with him. God helps those who partner with him. In fact, the Bible begins with this poem about creation, about how the world came to be. And at the end of the first chapter, Genesis 1:27 and 28, it says this, and this is where we're going to wrap up our time together. It says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves about the ground.'" I love this. This is how the world is meant to work. The greatest thing about the Bible is that it's not a story about how we wish things were. It's a story about how the way God has always intended them to be. And he creates man and woman, and he says, "Listen, you have one job. It's to rule." Which in the language of the Hebrews was language of royalty. He's saying you are something special. You're something significant. You've been created with power and meaning, and you now get to rule over the word. The word is radah in Hebrew. It means to reign, but it doesn't mean to reign on your own. It means to partner with God. In other words, you have not been excused from work. You have been excused from working on your own. God hasn't said, "Hey, don't try to fix your marriage." He has said, "Hey, don't try to fix your marriage without me because it won't work." He hasn't said, "Hey, don't try to get ahead of your finances and get out of debt, but don't do it without me." He hasn't said, "Hey, don't go ask for a promotion. Don't go ask for more leadership." He says, "Hey, don't go and do it without me." God's creation of people was not for you to be alone, but for you to work in complete partnership with him. So while God helps those who help themselves, he also helps those who partner with him. The people who say, God, I'm not gonna run out way ahead of where you are. God, I wanna walk with you through these difficult and trying moments. God, I wanna partner alongside of you. See, God's mercy has been handed down to every single one of us in this space, to every single one of us that's watching online. God's mercy has been handed to us. It's propelled us into the future. He is faithful. He will not forget us. You are children of God no matter what work you do or do not do. But God is longing for you to do whatever that work is with him. Whatever help you need, to do it alongside of him. The beautiful thing about the Bible is that we know that God does some of his best work alongside humanity, and we do some of our most miraculous things when God is right next to us. If you're like me at all, when you come across those moments where you realize you just can't do it, where you need help, and I would imagine that there's someone in here tonight who's going, "You know what, I need help. I've started a new job. Our marriage has gotten difficult through 2020. I feel lonely. I wish I had friends." Some of you, your prayer needs to be simply this: "God, I can't do this on my own, but I can do it with you. I can't solve all these problems in my family, in my marriage, in our finances on my own, but God, I can do it with you. And for those of you that have used this phrase so much to avoid helping people, because that's when I've used it, to avoid allowing God to use me to serve someone, to step in and fill the gap for someone, what we need to begin to pray is, God, I know they can't do this on their own, but I can help because of you. So my hope is that we would stop using this phrase. We would no longer say, God just helps those who help themselves. But we would begin to be people who know that because of his mercy, because of what he's called us to, because of how he's created the world, he actually wants to work with us. He wants to help us. But he also wants us to stand in the gap and help others. Let me pray over you tonight. God, I'm so thankful for this tribe of people out in North Fort Worth. God, I'm so thankful for their presence, for their friendship, for the way that they join together as a community of faith. God, would you continue to bring great unity out here? God, would you continue to be with this campus as they grow and as they have dreams about getting into a building? God, more than anything tonight, we ask that you would speak to us. Spirit, would you speak in these next, even just few moments in the car ride home as we lay in bed tonight? God, for those of us that need help, would you humble us enough to start asking for it? For those of us who have used phrases like this to avoid being someone's help, God, would you convict us, not bring us to guilt or to shame, but bring us to a place where we feel called to action, where we get to partner with you and help others. God, we love you, we trust you. It's in your son's name we pray.